Welcome again to Developing High Impact Senior Teams. We're excited to have you with us for this conversation because it's one that's essential for anyone looking to unlock the full potential of the senior leadership teams that they're in or the teams that they're working with. So today we'll explore what it takes to turn senior leaders into a unified, high-impact team that drives performance, alignment, and cultural transformation. And leading that conversation for us today is David Spach. We're really lucky to have you, David. David's a principal and founding partner at Leadership Circle. He coaches and advises senior leadership teams and other executives in organizations around the world, especially those leading transformational change and work within their own organizations or within their industries. He's worked with leaders at organizations like Honda, Kaiser Permanente, Syngenta, even Yale University, helping all of them create cohesive senior teams, galvanize their leadership, and drive meaningful culture change. A little closer to home, David's also served as a principal creator on many of Leadership Circle's methods and tools, lending his grounded perspective and also his deep insight into our work with leaders and in leadership. Having grown up in Yosemite National Park in California, David now lives in Utah, where he and his wife, Julie, run, bike, hike, play tennis, and do all sorts of other outdoor activities. So David, thank you for joining us. Welcome. I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Hi, everybody. It is so great to be with each of you. I'm glad to have you here and to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, obviously, which is building high impact senior teams. And so I don't think there's anything, a whole lot more I need to say in terms of setting this up, other than I am going to be sharing some slides here and there at some points quite a bit, and because they'll have kind of key points on them. And so I may pop in and out of that. And so let me make sure that's going to work. I'll put up a slide or two for a minute here. This is coming across fine. Yes, Sarah?
We're not seeing if you're sharing, we're not seeing
You're not? Okay, let me just do this then.
Tiny reminder that if you don't see, so once David is sharing his screen, you need to check above in the corner. There will be a tag that says see David's screen sharing.
Okay. Let's try this.
There we go. Now we see it.
Now you're seeing it, but you're seeing it in presenter view?
Just in the regular old view. Yeah.
You're seeing it in the regular old view that you would see on a laptop, or you're just seeing the main slide?
We're seeing the regular old view like we'd see on a laptop.
Okay,
so your next slide.
I'm going to go right here to this. How does that work?
Perfect.
Good. Okay, good. Well, then we're ready to move on from David Spach at this point into some thoughts here. So questions for possibility. I like to start this way in the way we get into the conversation, which is, what if I can fully tap into the senior team's inherent potential? What if we can really deploy the group at its best and actually meet that goal of setting a standard and aspiration for senior teams in the organization across the board? And what I find about senior teams is that not inevitably, but most of the time, these highly intelligent, technically skilled, they have a lot of relevant experience, and they have a deep commitment to the enterprise. However, yet it seems like too often they're seen by themselves sometimes, by others in the organization, by others in the industry sometimes as much limiters in the way that they work together as a team as they are enablers. And this is, for me, a huge problem, and it is a huge miss because most of the industries that I work in, not getting an advantage from the senior team and potentially having the senior team limit certain capabilities that the organization has is a deal killer. I mean, it's something that makes that's not viable Even if you're in a market leading situation, that can easily be lost in that regard. So I think especially when you're talking about senior teams, not just other teams, but senior teams where the whole point of the team existing as a team is to add value, to gain advantage. It is possible to run an organization without having a top team, for example. You could just have the CEO and their direct reports, and they can work together in ones and twos and coordinate here and there, and that's not really a senior team model, but that can be done. And so I've been compelled by Colin Powell's quote that that essentially with a senior leadership team, you're looking to get something additional. You're getting something that you shouldn't get just by adding everything up, and you're sort of defying the odds. And I think if we don't do that, we end up needing a lot of luck to make the organization be effective in the kind of competitive markets that we're in now. So anyway, I think everybody who's on this call is going to agree with most of that. Because of what we're talking about. But I think this is an important frame for me to come into it with. And so if you're willing, could we fire up, Crystal, that little poll for the group, just to kind of give us a view of how you enter into this space if you are leading a senior team, or if you are working with a senior team or closely associated member of a senior team. So let's just see where that's laying out. Okay, so we have quite a few. We have some of all of those three, but it looks like we're seeing even a little over half of the group is special advisor or consultant to a senior team. So this is very helpful context, I think, for us as we get into the conversation. Okay. All right, we've already talked about me. One of the things that I have found, by the way, a little bit more about my background. I have been working with senior teams for about 30 years because when I first entered my consulting career, I was doing specific work about evaluating the effectiveness of large-scale programs. And so I joined a consulting firm specifically for that role. And so we would always be addressing, these are major transformations in organizations, and we're immediately addressing how effective is the senior team, and then trying to get the senior team a step ahead to some degree of the rest of the organization. And so in that work, what I've found from the very beginning of that work is that it's not a given, unfortunately, that organizations or even the team itself takes collective leadership seriously. And so I would say that the first factor, the entry factor to this is to actually be taking collective leadership seriously and doing things against that. So not just believing in it, but actually working on it is a huge part of the value here. If we can get in and actually be actively working on the collective leadership at the senior team level, that's already going to put you in a different position than quite a few companies find themselves in. Surprisingly, but true. And so, what are we paying attention to? What are we actively engaging around? Is something that if we can get a senior team thinking collectively about that and working on it, it's already into the conversation.
Slow.
Uh-oh. Okay, what I am not going to be doing today is giving you sort of, paint by the numbers, specific things. I think, we do this, and this, and it always works. I think this is a very complex area. And so what we look for here, much as we do in a lot of leadership development in general, is we're looking for patterns that seem to be falling into the success story category and that are clearly working well and taking teams up a notch, and then looking for patterns that don't, that do the opposite. And so we want to be careful for those and look for those. And so I think I'm speaking to you today as a colleague, but who's thought about this and who's done a lot of this work. And as a result, we've done a lot to sort of capture some of these patterns that we've seen over the years. And so one of the patterns that we one one of the ways that we look for patterns, and one of the bases that I come from, where I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this today, but I think potentially a lot of you would also come from, if you're clicking into us at Leadership Circle, which is overall leadership effectiveness is a specific discoverable thing. We have a model that we use. We have a 360 that we use. We have 450,000 people have gone through this globally and have a great database on all this. So we're using data and using research patterns to talk about this. And so this leadership circle model is something that I'm always using with teams, not always as the focus, but definitely it's always there. The whole concept of what does it take to be effective in the leadership space. And this can be done at an individual level and also can be addressed collectively. So just to sort of highlight what some of those things are, there are 18 competencies that we use, the way that we slice things up, that fall into 5 subcategories. There are sort of 5 overall categories of creative leadership competencies. And these are the sorts of things that the more that leaders exhibit these, the more they're effective. And that this also applies individually, but it also will apply at a team level, but in a non-straightforward way. So these are positively correlated with overall leadership effectiveness. And we know for a fact they can be practiced and developed. And we also know that you can use many different combinations of these. And so depending on my personality, my background, I may have a variety of different ways of doing these things, and they can all be effective. And at the same time, we know that there are reactive tendencies, which are not always positive. They are positive and negative. They can be limiting. So they're built for lightning quick responses. These are things like things that I do to kind of keep myself safe and keep things moving forward. But they fall into very automatic habits that I may have around controlling, psychological protecting, or complying, that end up they end up often unconscious, very quick, and they'll end up simplifying things and also precluding other possibilities. So when I do these things, when I act in a way that gives up some of my power, or I act in a way that takes my power and forces it on other people, I end up hampering innovation and collaboration, and we don't get the same kind of complex solutions that we need. So I mentioned this because as we move from individual leadership to collective leadership, which is the space that we're really working heavily in making senior teams effective, we're going to be using the same insights, but we're going to have to translate them to that senior team space in a way that's not just taking all the individuals and piling them together, just like getting the strengths of this group isn't just by adding 1 + 1 + 1. There's a group dynamic here. And unfortunately, I think the focus can be often on the limiters. So one reason why I think people see that senior teams can be limiters is because it's so obvious when you get 2 or 3 or 4 people together. It's so easy for their own tendencies to create negative dynamics, or dynamics that limit the organization. And it's so frustrating, and it's ironic, and all these things that really grasp us and put us into our own individual reactive tendencies, that a lot of the challenge of working with a senior team, I've found, is to help move out of this reactive space into the creative space where we can effectively exhibit all these great qualities that we have and actually build on each other's. So keep moving with this. The way that we talk about this at an individual level, and then I'm going to talk about how that translates to a collective level, is by helping leaders develop and really lean into their own set of competencies and skills as a creative operating system. So it's like an overall orientation toward what am I trying to create here, and what is the best way that I can bring myself and others to the table to make that happen. That lens is what if leaders can take that lens, then we're open up a whole level of development for them. And that gets into purpose and meaning. It gets into leveraging my competencies. You can see on the right-hand side of the slide. And it gets me into a healthy relationship with my own reactive tendencies, which are just the things I do to sort of, address my anxiety and deal with complex challenges that are coming at me. So what we teach leaders or help leaders develop the capability to do are to stay in these key inquiries as a leader on a daily basis. What do I really want? Who am I and who do I need to be? Therefore, who am I becoming? And to keep that in front of myself every day. Who is it that I am becoming? Who is it that I want to be? But also, with whom am I in relationship and what does that require of me? So we often find that senior leaders, very capable, very powerful, typically used to being in a power situation, may not be as attentive to their having a full approach to being in relationship, and not just a relationship of power, but a relationship of creating great things together. And also, what am I doing, and what am I empowering and enabling other people to do? So if I were to have a leader thinking, and I can get a leader into a place where they're thinking and trying to put into action each of these questions on a daily basis, daily, weekly, monthly basis, then we're in a completely different conversation than we were before. So the topic of the day is senior leadership teams. And so again, what would we do besides having, maybe if we have 8 people on the senior leadership team, it would be great if they were all thinking about these things and actively working on these things and leaning into these things. But even that itself is not enough to accomplish what we need to do as a senior team. So I'm going to frame it now as senior team creative operating system. What would that look like? What are the questions and thoughts and conversations and efforts that I would be in on a regular basis if my senior team was really truly in the creative space of leadership, which we know is the leadership that creates lasting results and innovative, market leading solutions, value creating, mission accomplishing solutions. So the senior team creative operating system is one where we're seeing a tie explicitly to purpose, vision, and values on a regular basis, constantly refreshing that. It adds the collective leadership framing, and the questions look like, not surprisingly, what do we really want? Who are we? Who do we need to be? Who are we becoming? With whom are we in relationship, and what does that require of us? And then what are we doing and enabling others to do? So besides just changing the words from I to we, we've really changed what it is that the effort is all about and what that conversation looks like. Now we have a whole new things coming onto the table here to make this a real thing. It's not me thinking and journaling and then trying to put things into action. It is now fundamentally cooperation, and not just basic cooperation, but thorough integrated cooperation with other leaders in role as leaders, not just as people, and then shared sense making. So we actually need to get to the point as a senior team where we are seeing things either this in general the same way, we're coming at things the same way. Certain things we need to be seeing the same way. Certain things we can understand that there's a room for different views, but that we understand each other's views, and we understand that when I act, I'm acting in a way that is a little bit out of sync with my colleague's view over here, my teammate's view. But that's okay because I'm managing that as well, and I'm aware of that. And then shared action. So shared action, again, I think is a surprisingly big challenge for many executive teams, again, given who you have at the table and how they're successful in their careers. Shared action at a peer level, or shared action at a direct, especially I think at a peer level, is something that does not come as naturally as it will need to come in order to be successful. So just stopping for a second there, are there any sort of, is anybody lost, or are people saying, yes, this is good, I'm with you so far? Do we have any sort of things that are coming up as major issues? Because I think this is really where I'm going to transition now into exploring what does that look like at a senior team level. I'm just making sure we're good here.
David, we're seeing just some good comments in the chat saying that we were with you. We love the transition from the I to the we thinking. Anne had an interesting comment saying, we also don't want groupthink. So that might be something you can address that would be beneficial.
Yes. Well, and I think I'll just say for a second, I think groupthink is a perfect example of where, we all know, so we don't want groupthink, but what counts as groupthink is usually we're going to diagnose something as groupthink when it is limiting, when it has blinders associated with it, when it sort of precludes or silences other voices, sort of thing. But it's hard to see that, except in retrospect, right? Unless I disagree with it, then of course I see it as groupthink, but then I'm not really part of the groupthink. But if I'm in the middle of the groupthink, how do I know that we're operating properly? It's easy to see in retrospect or from the outside, hard to see from the inside. And so this is, I think, part of what we're trying to inculcate is the kind of way of operating and way of thinking about things and way of interacting with each other that keeps us out of those kind of self-sealing type of loops. So thanks for bringing that one up. Okay, so I'm just going to sort of dig into each of those questions that I put out there, because I really do think that thinking about these questions, and we'll make these slides available so you can kind of cross-reference and go back and so forth. But when we're talking about each of these questions, I think it's what I've found useful anyway, is to drop down into each of these and look at how can these play out. Because they do play out differently for every team. And as you're either a special, as many of us on this call are, if you're a special advisor or helper to or influencer to a senior team, then that's one angle you'll be bringing to the table. But if you're a leader of a senior team, or if you're a member of a senior team, it isn't just a matter of taking a specific question and just plopping it on the table, right? And it is, there are many methods of addressing many of these things out there. We have our own as consultants, but there are and we use quite a few that have been developed by others and so forth, and I'm sure you do as well. So there are many ways of doing these things. But what I'm suggesting here is that this overall kind of creative operating system for a senior team, thinking that way, and thinking in terms of these sort of conscious leader questions that now, instead of as an individual, we want to be addressing as a team. Then in holding that space, it's about thinking, okay, which one is really the one to address right now? How can we build on what we've been thinking in this regard and enrich the conversation and keep us in that conversation and help us to follow through, those sorts of things. So, for example, this is what do we really want? And I'm thinking about that in particular on how does that relate to what do I really want? Couple of observations I have here from the work that I've done with this. Number one is the inside out view is usually the best for this. So if we're going to have a conversation together about what do we really want to accomplish here as a senior team, what are we really up to? If I'm not clear on what I really want as a leader and what I'm really trying to create and how I'm really what kind of situations I'm trying to be a part of and what I want to see for this company from my own perspective, then it's a lot harder to have that conversation as a group. And so from that perspective, for that reason, we often put the self-development, the leadership's, the development of the individual leaders just a hair ahead so that we're sort of building on all that work as we get into the senior team work. So I would suggest that as you're doing senior team work, if you do enter from the team level and you haven't done significant work with people individually or they're not doing that kind of work, I would quickly get them into that work because it's going to be something that they can really lean on and leverage in order to get effective. And if they don't do that, we may be sort of bouncing into that. And we'll also tend to bounce into that problem with, let's say there's 8 on the team. There's going to be 2 or 3 probably at least on the team that may be having significant opportunities in their own sort of, creative thinking as a leader that could actually end up holding this whole conversation back significantly. And unless they at least see themselves in a journey in that regard. Now, also, the we version is often less accessible in terms of what we really want. It's more iterative. Like we get a little bit, we could say, well, what do we really want? And it could be a conversation about, well, what does our strategy say? Or what is our mission and vision that we came up with 2 years ago? So it's possible that the we version, you can get into what do we really want? What are we really trying to get there? And you just get a piece of it and then you build from there. You may not be able to get as deep as quickly on that, and that would be okay, is my experience. Most senior teams have done minimal amount of this work. That's my experience. Yours may be different, but working with teams across industries and so forth, it's actually shocking but surprising how many have done minimal amount of actually this conversation. This goes, I think, with a comment that was made recently, sort of, I say this with a grain of salt, but we want to be thinking of ourselves, how can we act as one brain? We have room for individual differences. We're not talking about groupthink, but we're talking about, can we act in a truly coordinated way where we're thinking, acting, and moving forward in ways that are coordinated? It turns out that this is actually what people expect us to do as a senior team. So the average person in the organization, an associate in the organization, will be sort of judging the senior team that way, even if it's has making no effort to do that itself. Is they think they should be sort of like one entity, one brain. But there's a lot of work that can go into that.
David, if I can jump in, there's a question in the chat that I think seems really resonant with this particular slide, and this what we think aspect. That Scott is asking, how do you avoid a we think at the senior leadership team level that believes the rest of the organization's aligned, when in actuality, the rest of the organization is not similarly aligned yet?
That is great. That is really great. And I think I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. I'm going to use the question, who are we in relationship with? Because I think that is where that opens up the best. So what do we really want? Often we have a great conversation about this and I'm still stuck with, yeah, too bad everybody else doesn't really get this, right, in the organization. Too bad that they don't understand it. Too bad they don't understand it the way we do. We need to get them understanding it the way we do. Which is, again, it's fine. I'm okay with that as we move forward, but I'm going to be noting to myself, this is going to be interesting as we get into this question about who we're in relationship with. Okay, so this one's kind of the entry point in many ways. It's also probably the end point at some level, because this refreshing this, are we still really clear on what we're really trying to accomplish here together? That needs to be brought up, over and over and sort of refreshed. But it is also the entry point, I believe, into this work. I'll give you a few examples. I could come up with probably more of these, and I'm sure lots of you can. Many of you could come up with a lot of these, but here are some of the ways that these inquiries have looked for me in terms of, helping the team ask, what do we really want? So, and I put on these, for those of you who are real, leadership circle junkies, as I am, in terms of kind of relating things back to the overall creative leadership operating system, and also in terms of just the various competencies and challenges eliminated by the leadership circle model. You can also categorize these things in terms of those categories: achieving authenticity, systems awareness. You see here, I've kind of noted where those might fit on that creative side of the framework. So I'm not going to speak a lot to that as I go through, but it's there for you in case you find that interesting and generative for yourself, because maybe it's not exactly this language for you, or for the particular senior team that you're on or working with, but it could be something where, as you think about achieving for you, what do you think the question that really could be posed to your team and help them address would be? So one is this: what is winning and losing for me, for each of the others, and for us together? So this to me is an important question. I'm thinking of specifically of a leadership team that I've worked with for 5+ years, and they've gone from, startup $20 million of revenue to several billion dollars of revenue now. So I mean, a very, very high growth organization. But and had a leadership team with some that had worked together before, some that hadn't. But I'll tell you, when I first started working with the group, a leadership conversation for them, whether it was about strategy, whether it was about purpose and vision, whether it was about tactics, things getting done, the question came back always to, how do I win? Like, how do I be successful? How does this become a great investment for me? These are like people toward the end of their careers in many cases, trying to make this a big, they saw a big opportunity for them, and they saw a big opportunity in the market. But they would essentially talk about negotiating with each other what the terms could be for splitting up the money at the end, almost, as opposed to really getting into what is it that we're trying to accomplish? What is this going to require from us? And so this is an example where they would get into that conversation without realizing they were having that conversation, and to make it obvious to them that we need to think about and talk about and share and come to some conclusions with what does winning look like here? How about from my perspective? How about from your perspective? How about from her perspective? And looking at essentially defining that very, very consciously. Another one, and what I had to do, the reason I highlighted this bottom one is what is possible and compelling for us. Winning and losing was such a simplistic model for this particular team that what we did is we sort of shifted into what is really possible here, and what do we find compelling about this? Like, what keeps you in, what keeps me in to this conversation? And what do we think is really possible? Because we had some on the team that were extremely grandiose, and others that were, sort of the person that always kind of brings us back to reality, in some ways. And then, of course, they're shying away from the things that are riskiest or that would be the biggest wins. And so to have that conversation about what is really possible here in this configuration of a business in this market, and what's possible for us in terms of creating an organization around that and capabilities. So that became very rich. Here's the next question to talk about, and this is where I think was brought up a minute ago, which is, with whom are we in relationship? And so the difference here between me as a leader thinking about who am I in relationship with, I mean, this is always a really useful conversation as a leader. Who am I really in relationship with? What do they need from me? What do I need from them? What are the requirements of that? How do I make sure I see that as a relationship and not just as a transaction on a given conversation? But when we start getting into as a leadership team, this requires a big mental shift and a sort of willingness to engage with each other, because it introduces the concept of owning relationships collectively. So even your direct report is sort of co-owned by me because we are colleagues, and they see us as part of a team. They see us as leading the company. When they try to execute what you've asked them to execute, they're going to bump up against people that report to me and may or may not, and may reflect a different reality or a different attitude or a different vibe. And so how can we really recognize that we do own, or we can own, these relationships collectively, and that we fundamentally represent each other, not ourselves? This is an actual mental shift that I think, as you maybe reflect on the leadership team you're on or working with, you may have a sense, your opinion would be a good place to start, of how well are we embracing this concept, and are we doing what it would take to make that then part of the way we be effective. It's an outside way to get at identity. And it also requires then, if this is the case with these people I'm in relationship with, then it raises, do we understand what these people are thinking about us? Do we understand what these people see? Do we understand what these people think is the best ideas? How well do they like our ideas that they're trying to execute? And so this calls up collective feedback in a systematic way and an ongoing way. And so how do we make that happen becomes a question that can be posed to the team. Few examples on this one. are, what are we building together? I see that as a different question than what do we really want? What we really want is the outcome. What we really want is a certain, achievement. But the question is, what are we building together to get there? And that also I think that also, I think it allows an opportunity to have a meaningful discussion about, are we sure that's what we're building? I mean, what do we want to build, and what are we really building together? Is a relationship question around these other people that we're interacting with. Who are these teammates of mine? Is useful, and it's often one that senior teams develop I find them developing it very unevenly. So certain teammates will know each other very well, and certain won't really know each other particularly well at all. And so these questions are important here. But then back to that thing about feedback. What do people think and feel about us and our ideas? This is I think, a huge, rich area for conversation, and most senior teams do not have nearly. It's getting better, I would say, over the last number of years with the capability for surveying and so forth. But what do people really think and feel about us, not individually, us together, is a big one. We leverage data gathering and analysis in this regard quite often. How about Sarah, any questions or anything that are coming up right now?
Yeah, you must have been reading my mind, because there's a question that is really perfect for this moment. Celeste is asking, when do we ask these questions? Do we ask them as part of one-to-one coaching, as part of a team activity, in a conversation, in an exercise?
I mean, at the risk of being frustrating, I think the answer is yes, both. I mean, that in itself is probably as important as any of the questions. Is for me to start by thinking, are we getting to these questions? Which of these seem like the ones that are most relevant to us right now, or that are there that I've heard the team sort of, maybe potentially open to this question? Then typically the way I would do is I would raise some of these questions individually first with people that I think are ready to have that conversation. And then I would use those conversations to help me, calibrate and potentially sort of rally the group around, yes, we should answer this question. This is worth some time that we should have together. We should be thinking about this individually, and we should spend some time in a session, dedicated time, or time in, we have this be a recurring topic over some time. So I think trying to get some awareness, starting with my own perceptions, and starting to get some awareness and test some awareness and interact with others to see what could be a fruitful place to move in this conversation. And I would also look at the other 5 as sort of interactive. So, all these questions are sort of interactive in the sense that I may be only able to go a little bit on this one because it's going to point us back to another, right? So how, who are we in relationship with is going to bounce right up back into what they, we're in relation with these people. We own this together. We're having cross impacts on them. And so this is what they're giving us feedback about. So then that's going to make me say, okay, I could just say, okay, well, let's fix all that. But it's usually not that easy. So it's more like that's going to put me back into a question about, well, this is good because it forces us to now have a conversation about, for example, what do we really want? In some cases, we together act like we want this, but in other cases, we act like we want something different. What is it? Are those reconcilable, or are those different things? And if so, we probably need to get ourselves straightened out. Otherwise, we will appear confusing and sort of not close to other people, because they will see us as being sort of not getting our act together. We don't know what we want. All right, here's another one.
Before you jump in, I also just want to give you a quick time check. We're at about 15 minutes till the hour, and we've got lots of good questions in the chat.
Okay, got it. Okay, so I'm going to move a little bit fast and consider that a request in a way. Okay, so what are we doing in enabling? Again, as opposed to the question, what am I doing? What am I doing is not always obvious. So it's easy as I'm working to think, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. And then I see specific things that I'm doing as what I'm doing. But the reality is I'm doing things all the time, including how I listened to that feedback, how I thought about things, how I didn't think about things, when I showed up for something, when I didn't. So a lot of my own action is not visible to myself. So the actions of the others are usually more visible in some ways, not their thinking, but their acting. But the problem is, I don't think that as us acting collectively. I think as that's what she's doing. That's what he's doing. I don't think of it oftentimes in the way that, well, when she does it, we do it. Because we're, in a sense, because we're the leadership team. And when I do it, he does it because we're doing it collectively. And so this is, I think, an area where what are we doing about this? Or what is it that we're doing when people are raising these issues? This can be a really good way of entering without making like a big sort of overarching conversation. It can be had about specific things. What just happened? What did we do? What did other people do? What did we not see that we were doing? And this can combat the fact that a lot of leadership conversations that I'm around, leadership team conversations, devolve into, what's going on with this, and who are we in relationship with? And it's like, what do we need from them? These managers need to understand blah, 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 blah. If we could just have the directors doing this, this, and this, everything would be better. But the problem is that ignores what we're doing, which is much more important and much more actionable by us. The other thing is, this is an obvious thing to some degree, but often forgotten, and it's a big trap for this, which is what we're doing. We often answer as what we're trying to do, or what we would see ourselves as doing. That's different than what we're doing and different than what the impact is being had. And then I'll mention this last thing, which is full accountability mentality. There are various different branded ways of looking at this, or a lot of thought leaders have this, described differently. But if we are not taking full accountability when something goes wrong, what did we as a leadership team, what could we have done more or better or less that would have impacted this? And first, let's impact that. Even if we think that's only 20% of the problem, we should impact that first. That way we can go to the rest of the system and ask it and them and him or her to address their accountability. But we can't do that if we're looking at theirs, because we're saying, well, your actions are more important than my actions in this. Couple of inquiries here. I'll be a little bit brief because I think that, hopefully this is sort of painting a picture, and we can look at these questions anytime and we can come up with our own versions of them. But this idea of what we are doing includes things like, what could be more clear and compelling? How about strategies and priorities? Are those clear? What are we sanctioning by our actions and words? And then that thing about full accountability. Typically every day is an opportunity to embrace full accountability in a better way. Rarely are we doing exactly what we need to do in that regard. Okay. Then this last couple here. What are we and who do we need? Who are we? Who do we need to be? Builds off the version that would be an I, but it really is, this is more role related, right? Because it's, who am I? I'm asking that as a person. And you're going to be able to, I'm going to be able to express who I think I am, and then we can iterate on that. But in terms of who are we as a team, this is something we have to create together. And we do it based on roles. We're based on the fact that we've come together to accomplish something, what we really want, and we each have our own roles. And so I'm not only answering who am I in my role, I'm answering who are we collectively across all of these roles. And then I've captured here, this is where I think the value of bringing up what we often call like our adaptive edge, like what as a team do we need to push for? What does who we are, what do we need to do differently? What do we, essentially gets into the what do we want to become? A few ideas on some inquiries for who we are. couple that are interesting to me here is one that's maybe not addressed enough, which is maybe it was a little bit more during the pandemic, perhaps, but what is really healthy for us collectively? We're, a set of people, human beings trying to get this done. And, we're not superhuman. And so we have to, try to accomplish all these things for the organization. But what is healthy for us and for the organization? And then lastly, what are we willing to sacrifice? When we say we stand for something, when something's our values, then it should be easy to find trade-offs that we're making, things that we actually would love to have that we cannot have because we're willing to sacrifice it. This is going to be a very rich for an organization that's starting to get into this. Who are we? For a senior team that's starting to get into this, this is a really good one to sort of up the ante and create some clarity, which is, okay, what are we willing to sacrifice? And are we in fact sacrificing that? Do we have examples from this last month of where good job to us because we made a trade-off. We sucked it up on something where it's important that we do that because of what we stand for. Last one, and we'll move to just a wrap and some questions and conversation. Who are we becoming? So can we take ourselves as an object? Not only who are we, defining, leaning into being it, but then can I also look at our senior team as something with me in it, not different from me, but it's something that I'm a part of. But I can also look at it as an object and say, that is, that's not where I would want it to be. And I'll put in work over time to get it there. It actually can be more accessible than the I version, because who am I becoming is actually a hard question. But who are we becoming actually can be surprisingly engaging and easy once I kind of take on that mindset. It can really illuminate some great conversations because, I can say, you know what, I would love for us to be X and see what the others will say. And I would really encourage on the who are we becoming, that this not be sort of a mental exercise, but we translate it into specific declarations with observable implications that we could then measure against. So, and a lot of the, inquiries to me, I'll bring a couple of those out. The second one is, how are our change experiments going? Now, it's a loaded question because if we're not doing any change experiments, then we won't know. But we as a leadership team, much as I as a leader, should have some things I'm trying out to do, see if I can do them a little bit differently and see if that gets me closer to where I want to be and gets me better results than I was getting before. And so the bottom one is an interesting question that I've used with a number of teams who are actually in that situation. And then I started to use that as almost a theoretical, which is if we change leaders, either if we swapped out one of us now becomes the CEO or now becomes the head of the team, what would that new leader need to honor and exemplify in order to keep us going on this path, keep the gains that we've gotten and move us forward? And, that's a really rich conversation. And then know it when I see it thing at the top. I've used that when I use that kind of for many, many years, which is I ask stakeholders when we're talking about the senior team, for example, or even the strategy, how will you know that we're really making an improvement, that we're really, moving in that direction? And it's usually very easy for people to say, I'll know it when I see this. Not to say we're there, but I'll know we're moving in that, maybe really moving there when I see this. And I think that is a great question for a senior team to ask itself. How will we really know if we're making progress here? Because we can talk till we're blue in the face. And if we do, and we don't get anywhere, then we will run the risk of becoming cynical, in which case we probably will have to be changed out as a senior team. So let's talk about it. And then I'll maybe just hit really quickly some final points to wrap it up.
Well, David, we have 6 minutes left. And I don't know if we're going to have much time for questions from the chat, but there's one in particular that there were enough comments about. I think it's important to ask. So are you ready for that question now, or do you want to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, so there were several comments about trust, about building trust or needing to rebuild trust, or if there's a lack of trust on the senior leadership team, how do you address that? So can you talk a little bit about trust in this work?
Yes. So I think that what I found over time is the for me, the best way to think about building the trust is to be actively in the conversation. So if we're in the conversation and we trust each other enough to have the conversation, then we can build and build and build and build. And we can build enough credit, enough that we can get to, what'll happen is each piece we get the next, maybe a little bit more juicy, a little bit more challenging truth comes out with each other. And then we can build and build from that. And so I would say really all of these questions that we've talked about today are exactly the kind that can build trust if the group and the team are willing and able to move into that conversation in a genuine way. And that's one reason why it's so important for the leader, and if there's special advisor or helper, to be able to hold that space for that conversation to happen with enough psychological safety to feel like we're not into the position of like, if this conversation goes poorly, one of us or both of us will suffer, tremendously. We need to be, it needs to be safe enough that it's like, hey, you know what? Let's have this conversation now. We're better off having the conversation. But then I think also creating not necessarily guardrails, but creating enough kind of supportive environment where we don't have to, we're not forcing each person to be, forthcoming in ways that feels unsafe to them at the time. But that they're also noting, wow, I feel unsafe. And we're agreeing together, if we're seeing places where we're unsafe, we need to make a note of that. Maybe we can't go there right now, but that it's part of the what are we becoming? We need to become the team that'll have that conversation. Right now, it doesn't feel like we can have it. Is there another one?
Well, if you have more to say, I think I'd go ahead and
okay, I'll say it and then okay. The last thing I'll say is really just say some points to carry forward. So if I were to say what are some of the points to carry forward besides just kind of this, some of the maybe specifics of some ideas for questions and so forth, but the point of the leadership team to exist is to operate in creative leadership. Otherwise, there's really no point having the team. In fact, it can be negative. And I would say that definitely about a top team. And I might even argue that any senior level team, you don't have, there are probably ways, if you're not going to do this work, there are ways you could minimize and just make it more of a collaborative thing where, you have to cooperate and you have to share information. But if you want to get the benefit of a real senior team, embrace and develop a creative operating system for that team. Individual and collective development go hand in hand. You need to hold the space to make sure that we are addressing collective leadership. And the point is not that we're solving collective leadership, that we're at least addressing it. And we're leaning into that and we're counting it as a real thing. And we're pursuing potentially these or other conscious leadership questions together. And we just expect, this is not something that only comes up when something's going wrong. So a lot of the way we have these things set up sometimes is, all right, now it's an intervention. We need to talk about what we really want or something. And then half of it is half the team figuring out, why are we talking about this right now? I don't get it. Is this really a veiled way of getting at, Fred's problem or my problem or something like that, right? So what we want is to be, for the team to understand, part of our being a team is to pursue these questions together. That's how we're going to get where we want to go. And so the other thing I would just say on this is, if we can see ourselves as a team that we, as an individual, in the same way that an individual leader would, to understand I'm kind of on a journey here. It's kind of a never-ending journey here, which is to continue to understand and become something better and more effective as a team. As a senior team, we don't need to do stuff that isn't needed, but what is really needed. And once we get into there, we realize the opportunities are huge. And so what I would say here is, do we have a story that we're kind of developing and working about our own identity? Who are we together? Who are we becoming? What difference is this work that we're doing making? And why is it important to us? If we can answer those, we put ourselves in a much better position to be an influence in the organization, that the organization and on the strategy, where the organization experiences us as a net positive and as a real enabler. And we want to hold that story lightly because it's always only partially true, and that's okay.
All right, David, with that, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off because we are right butting up against the top of the hour. I'm sorry we didn't get to more questions and answers, but I'm glad that we got to address a couple of questions during the presentation. Thank you, David, for jumping in and answering those when we were posing them. I just want to thank all of you for attending. Thank you so much for your attention and your time today. This was a fantastic conversation. And we just want to say that if you want to bring this kind of leadership and expertise into your organization and into your senior leadership teams, then please put yes in the chat and we'll reach out directly to see how we might be able to work with you. Next month, we're hosting Leadership Circle Principal Mike Burrell, who will discuss the trap of good enough, how even well-performing teams can fall just short of being exceptional and how they can push through that plateau. That's coming up on August 28th. So watch your inboxes and Leadership Circle social media for details about that. As soon as I'm done talking, the call will end, but I just want to remind you again that this has been recorded and we'll be sending out a message probably within a week or so with a link to that recording, as well as to a downloadable summary of key takeaways and other pieces. I know David mentioned that we'll make some of these questions available, so we'll find a way to work that in too. If we didn't get to a question that you posed and you really wanted answered, please respond to that email and we'll do our best to get back to you. But in the meantime, on behalf of Leadership Circle, on behalf of David Spach, I'm Sarah Stahl saying thank you again so much for attending today, for your time and for your attention. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Sarah.